Hello there, adventurers, and welcome to Wally DM. Today is the first episode of a new video series that's going to be geared towards players and dungeon masters, and we're going to call that D&D Backstories. For the players, I'm hoping that the backstories that we present will provide some entertainment, in addition to perhaps giving you some ideas of how you can craft a backstory for a character that you are going to play. At the end of the video, we're going to analyze the backstory, and for the Dungeon Masters, I'm going to go over ideas that I would use if I were trying to incorporate this D&D backstory and this character into my campaign. Now, today's backstory was written by a friend of mine that had never played D&D or Pathfinder before. And as far as the campaign goes, this was our 2016 Pathfinder campaign, and this was actually the first game that I had run in 15 years. So I hope you enjoy the story. We're going to take a look today at Randy the Ranger. Before we get started, just a reminder, if you have not joined our Discord yet, I highly encourage you to do so. Come on over and hang out with me and a lot of cool folks that know a lot about D&D. Also, I have recently updated the tiers and rewards, so please consider supporting us on Patreon. All donations go to support the channel, whether it be through miniatures and terrain for the videos or for future giveaways. The backstory for Randy the Ranger is quite long, so if you would like to read the story in its entirety, I will post a link to the website in the description below. The beginning portion of the backstory tells of Randy's father Bart and his mother Ingrid Strongborn. They lived in a wooded village at the foot of an inactive volcano. They struggled to get by, but Bart was able to provide by farming, hunting, and doing construction and weapon crafting. Now, the story goes that Bart was out checking his traps one day when he heard a scream and a loud squeal coming from over a rocky terrace. That is where he saw the king and his guards cornered by two of the largest boars that he had ever seen. Bart helped kill the boars and was rewarded by the king by having a place in the city and within the kingdom. So Bart, Ingrid, and their son Randy never had to worry about providing or struggling to get by ever again. Now, due to his father's bravery, Randy grew up being able to learn from the king's wizard, the king's druid, and the local alchemist, and on occasions he was even trained by the king himself, and he became a young ranger to help defend the town and hunt and forage for food. Now, as previously mentioned, the small village rests in the foothills of a very large volcano, and though the volcano itself lie dormant, the chambers and corridors within the mountain's many cave systems seem to burst at the seams with treacherous activity. At the heart of the mountain, in the deepest of the chambers, a powerful skeleton wizard had made his home. Though few people had ever laid eyes on the Wizard King and lived to tell the tale, his minions made their presence known quite regularly. These minions usually came in two forms: golems constructed of brimstone and wraiths of fire. Every few months, the Wizard King would send his constructs to the city to pillage and destroy what they could with little to known reason. Some of the older villagers would tell stories that it was sheer envy on the Skeleton King's part. They speculated that the king was envious to the human condition. We were capable of emotion and feeling and had meaning to our lives, while his was but an empty shell of what he once was and no longer capable of such things. Nonetheless, every few months the city dwellers would have to band together to fight off the minions to protect their families and village. It was through these trials and tribulations that Randy was able to hone his combat skills. In the beginning, he would stay at a distance, flinging arrows at the constructs with a meager bow. But as he grew older, he became more skilled and able to hold his own in hand-to-hand combat. As the time passed and his skills continued to improve, the Skeleton King sent more and more minions into the raid. But it was at this time that his mother and father were getting older and less capable of defending themselves. In the last battle that Randy saw in their hometown, in an effort to protect his wife, Randy's father Bart gave his own life. It was then that Randy knew what he had to do: hunt down and destroy the minions at their source, kill the Skeleton King once and for all. Now, when Randy's mother learned of this plan, she did not want him to go. She did not want him to take on this task, but Randy, now more a man than a boy, remained steadfast on his intentions. He told his mother that he must take this dangerous journey and he must put an end to the evil. Knowing that she could not stop him, she reluctantly handed him his father's longbow and his trusty dagger. With his father's weapons in arm, he kissed his mother goodbye and vowed one day to return. After he left his mother's home, he was met by the village king, and the village king told him of a town many miles on the opposite side of the mountain. Many residents of this said town were famed for their feats of valor and adventures. The king was sure if Randy were to travel to this town and ask around, he would find someone willing to help, or at least help him further his battle skills. With his father's weapons in hand and the king's advice, Randy set off to find this new town and the adventures that wait within. Many uneventful days later, after rounding the mountain as the king had suggested, Randy saw a village off in the distance. With a renewed sense of urgency, Randy took off in a hurry to find himself just minutes later at the gates of a village bustling with activity. Tired and weary from his travels, Randy's first stop was at the local inn. He opens the door and sits at one end of the tavern bar to order himself a pint. After halfway through the pint, with a keen eye on his surroundings in this strange place, Randy notices a stranger walking his way. So that's the backstory of Randy the Ranger. Now, as Dungeon Masters, how can we incorporate parts of this backstory into our homebrew campaign? Well, the first idea that I have is we are already set up with a villain. There is this skeleton wizard that lives in a volcano that sends its minions out to destroy towns and villages. And it's also responsible for the death of one of our characters' fathers. So there's already the motive there to set the villain in place. And the great thing about it is, since all the characters are level 1, I don't have to develop the villain right away. I have to put maybe signs and hints of the villain, but I have plenty of time later on as I homebrew this to decide if this is going to be an evil lich, or if this is going to be some other kind of undead powerful minion, or maybe something totally different. Now, the second thing I took out of this backstory was a way to introduce this campaign. At the end of Randy's story, it begins with him in a tavern, or it ends with him in a tavern and begins with him in a tavern, or something like that. And someone is approaching. And of course, I pull that in. One of the other player characters are approaching him because part of their backstory is now just starting to tie into Randy's. And I gave them, when I did run this session 1, probably about 3 or 4 hours. They went to a play. They got to know each other for a little bit. And that is when these brimstone constructs and these fire wraiths, and I even put fire giants in there, and they came through and they just totally demolished the town. So our level 1 PCs are scrambling about. They're trying to get people to safety, and their first game 1 session is trying to escape, fight off these undead, and just get the heck out of there. Now, the final thing that I took out of this backstory was something that I didn't develop until later. And that was a way, or at least part of a way, to defeat this villain. And they actually had it on him all the time. And that was Randy's bow. I seen that this bow and arrow that was Randy's father's meant a lot to him. It's very well constructed and things of that nature. So I wanted to make it a magical bow. But it wouldn't be activated until the proper command word was spoken. And finally, as I think they were like level 3, level 4, and they finally met someone that had the bow before Randy's father did. And he looked at it, he's like, oh my goodness, that's my bow, and gave them the command word. And then Randy found out that he had a magical frost bow. And that later on, as the story started to progress, we incorporated that bow as one of the tools that they were going to need to defeat this villain that lives in the volcano. So those are a few of the ideas that I had for incorporating this character into my homebrew campaign. Now, do keep in mind that future videos in this series will feature backstories that I am not familiar with. So as Dungeon Masters, we'll take a look at those stories and figure out how to incorporate them into our homebrew campaign, and even pull out a couple of areas where we could provide future surprises for that character and that player as our game and our campaign progress. So that's all I have for you today. What did you think of the backstory and the format of this video? If you were a dungeon master out there, what would you have done to incorporate this into your game, or what future surprise would you have for Randy the Ranger? I'd love to hear from both players and DMs, so please leave a comment below. It helps the channel out a lot. Thank you very much for watching, and on to the next.